So Johnson and Sunak reject calls to resign over fines. Does anyone really care anymore? Does Neil Channing care? Does Paul Krishnamurty care? Does William Kedjanyi care? Do I care? We'll find out on the polling stage today. William Kedjanyi, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Johnny. And yourself?
You have a pep in your step because you're telling me it's increasingly likely we're only going to have it, the polling station special on the Northern Ireland election.
Yes, we are very close. We're getting close to having some markets for Northern Ireland as well as markets for the local election. So watch this space over the next week. Oh, and also, of course, how could I forget? There's an election in Australia, which we'll be turning our eyes downwards in the next few weeks. So all that's come. And also tonight, by the time this is out, I hope we'll have French election second round betting. So yeah, all very much happening.
Yeah, we will talk about France as well. Paul, you were particularly interested in this Aussie election.
Yeah, I do. I think it's firstly, it's a big betting heat. I think you'll get a lot more money traded on this than you would on, for example, any other European election beyond France. It'll probably be in the top 5 worldwide. And it's a cracking betting heat. I mean, both sides have gone odds on. We've seen quite a drift from the favourites for no logical reason at the moment. And I've got a strong opinion. I think Labour at 4-6 on Betfair, they are a tremendous bet. They've been ahead in the polls for ages. Like they're up to 13% ahead, right, of the coalition. And they've been there for ages. And you've also got some new independents running this time, a whole wave of them, who are targeting coalition seats. Now, the current situation as it stands is they have a majority of one coalition. And the bet on Betfair is to provide the Prime Minister after the election. So, in other words, it's very possible that Labour could win this by gaining 1 or 2 seats, and forming a new majority. And I think all that's going on is the market is being it's been spooked by what happened in the last election there, which is that it was really close. It was like 49-51 all the way through. Labour were deemed to be ahead, but they ultimately lost. So the polls were about 3% wrong and they were criticised. And I think they might well be 2 or 3% wrong again. But the lead is much, much bigger this time. And I mean, if we had an election here and one party was 13% ahead of the other and consistently 6 to 8, they would be 10 to 1 on. This is 4-6.
Love a long-term bet, particularly 4-6, but a 1 to 10 shot. Neil Channing, are you convinced?
Well, I think I am actually. Paul convinced me the other week on that one when it was 4 to 9, and nothing seems to have changed. And now it's 4 to 6. So yeah, just have more on.
What have you made of the whole the party in lockdown saga? Obviously, they're not going to resign.
Well, I think it's been hilarious.
Yeah.
I've found it absolutely hilarious. The reaction of people has been absolutely on point and totally predictable. The people that were coming out yesterday and saying, we've got him now, he's sure to resign. I mean, what planet are you on?
Did anyone say that?
He literally got fined for not accepting the normal rules of society, basically, and so to expect him to then say, I tell you what, there's a precedent that we have, the ministerial code, and if somebody lies to Parliament, they have to resign. We've already established this bloke doesn't follow the rules. Like, how is he going to resign? It's absolutely ludicrous. I wouldn't take 100 to 1 that he resigns this month. I mean, it's just absolutely mental. If you're relying on him resigning, you really are in trouble. If you think, we talked, I think it was last week, I just was finding it quite funny seeing those backbenchers. I think Fabricant was one of them. Actually, Michael Fabricant's been in the news quite a bit in the last 48 hours. But I think he was one of the backbenchers that was absolutely excited about going to that dinner about 10 days ago where Boris Johnson bought them dinner. And he was interviewed on the way in and he said, oh, yes, it's really good. They've taken our picture and we got a glass of champagne. And I thought, is that all it takes? Like, literally, he's an MP earning 80,000 a year living in central London. I mean, he doesn't get a glass of champagne and someone to take his picture quite regularly. If that's all it takes to get their support, it's amazing. But like, I kind of feel like those backbenchers, the ones that really hate him are the Scottish Tories. Like, they absolutely hate him. To a man, they all put in the letters about 6 months ago, and then they withdrew them the other day. Now, the leader of the Scottish Tories yesterday said that it's not the right time to get rid of him because of the war.
Yeah.
Well, if the person who hates him more than any of the other backbenchers doesn't think it's the time, how are they going to find 54 of them? There's absolutely no possible chance that this leads to Boris Johnson going. I did think the only slight thing that might lead to it was if Rishi Sunak stuck the knife in. You know, Rishi Sunak must wake up at some stage, if he hasn't done already in the last few days, and think to himself, well, that's basically it. My chances of becoming the Prime Minister have gone now.
Yeah.
Now, Mrs. wants us to live in America, clearly. That's why they have green cards. They've got a house in America. They spend a lot of time in America. They definitely don't spend a lot of time in Richmond, North Yorkshire. And the prospect of being a backbencher in Richmond, North Yorkshire is obviously not appealing to them. You know, they pay their taxes who knows where, and they live in lots of places, but not in the constituency.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like if he could have turned around yesterday and said, well, my position is completely untenable, I've broken the law, and I lied to Parliament, and anybody doing those two things has to resign, so therefore I resign, that might put pressure on Boris Johnson. But he didn't do that. He turned around and said, well, I've done nothing much wrong and I paid my £50 and I'm moving on. And of course, Johnson's going to do the same. And now his main challenger and his main competitor has been totally mortally wounded, politically speaking. I think that's a brilliant result for Boris Johnson. I actually think, much as I dislike Boris Johnson, I think he's played this whole situation brilliantly.
Yeah.
The trip to Kiev was clearly planned in advance. In order to detract from the fines that were coming. We don't have a Metropolitan Police Commissioner at the moment, and it's up to the government pretty much to decide who that will be. So you can easily see why they decided to give out these fines during the parliamentary recess. It's all worked out perfectly for him, I would have said.
You cannot cut Neil Channing in full flow, William. But what he said there about Rishi Sunak's quite interesting. We have some betting repercussions on this as well in terms of the next Prime Minister, in terms of the next Tory leader. And it's not looking great for Rishi, to be fair.
No, it's not. I mean, he was a big drifter even before the fixed penalty notices because of the issues with Ashgana Murphy, I hope I got that right, and her non-dom status. Then a lot of bad briefings for him, and also just a lot of very bad politics. He'd been throwing his toys out the pram well before this anyway, whining about, I think it was the Office of Budget Responsibility, basically just doing their job, and how mean they've been to him. And his approval rates have been on the side anyway. He was 8-1 next Tory leader before the fixed penalty notices came out, before that news broke. And that is a pretty big drift from basically any point you want to measure it. Just regarding how the other contenders have changed, we've got two shorteners, Tugendhat and Liz Truss. Liz Truss, a big shortener, now 5-1 next PM, and I think even shorter to be the next Tory leader. And we are seeing, I think, some shorteners elsewhere. Wallace, people are inquiring about him. We've talked about him before in the programme. And also, just a name I want to talk a bit more about, and I think she's been mentioned positively by Paul before, Penny Mordaunt. Although I must admit, I do not have it to hand as to whether she's come out in support of Johnson yet. I didn't see it on the Sky charts last evening when I last looked at the big list of MPs who have come out in support.
Can I just make a quick general point about that next PM market in terms of political markets generally? I mean, the next Conservative leader market on Betfair has got 170,000 matched. Now, we tend to think when we look at these things, they're quite long-term markets, and we look at them, and they're not hugely liquid. A lot of the times, people have got up, a tenner or £5 or £3 or whatever. But they trade differently to other long-term markets because people don't want to tie up their money, obviously. So, you can get in this market, you'll get days and days and days where literally a bet isn't struck. And then you get a day like, the last 2 days where there's suddenly a whole bunch of activity. So when we look at the liquidity in it and the moves in it, often they don't really mean anything, I think. And it was quite interesting that when Rishi Sunak was drifting from 6-4 out to about 6-1, which he was about a week ago, nobody really shortened. Like, it wasn't like people were going, oh my God, Rishi Sunak has to drift because, you know, Nadeem Zohahi's suddenly got a really big chance, or whatever. It was just mostly the only people looking at it were people that wanted to delay Rishi Sunak. And then it drifted, you know, obviously yesterday he drifted quite suddenly when the fixed penalty notices came in. He got to 16-1 at one stage. And it was then, I think, that people thought, well, hang on a minute, we need to shorten somebody up, because we used to be betting to 110 on this market. Now we're only betting to 101. So I don't really think the money for Liz Truss, you know, Tom Tugendhat's barely shortened really in the last week, even though Rishi Sunak's basically tripled in price. Penny Mordaunt has hardly changed in that time. The only person that's really changed is Liz Truss. I think she hit 8.6 and now she's 6.6. So that's quite a big move, but that would have been done on really small money. I mean, hardly anything, less than £200.
If I just bring Paul in there, sorry, William, I was momentarily distracted from you there, just looking for the next Conservative leader market, which I don't think we have, but you did tip Penny Mordaunt up for this, Paul, and she's only 12 to be the next Prime Minister now.
I think it's a cracking price. I think, I mean, Neil's right about the market. It's very shallow in mid-term, but I think ultimately there's still only a few people who are plausibly going to run. And the game is just identifying those people who are going to run, and they will shorten up when they're in a field of 5. Now, that's the Liz Truss thing. I don't think that Liz Truss her stock's gone up at all, but the favourite's out, so she's shortened up. That makes sense. Everybody assumes she'll run. Tugendhat has said he'll run, so let's assume that he won't go off any bigger than 8-1. Mordaunt, again, this has been strongly rumoured from people who know the Conservative Party and backbenchers that she's got a big following amongst the new intake of MPs, the 2019 intake. And I think, to be honest with you, Mordaunt's played this. She's been fortunate in a way, because though she was a Brexiteer, she wasn't part of the club. She wasn't part of Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson's club. So they didn't promote her. They didn't give her any kind of major role in this administration. And I think that when this comes up, personally, I do still think he will not be leader at the next election, Boris. The ideal position to be in will be the person who's not tainted by the Johnson government.
5 to 6 each or 2 actually on that front.
I'm just not. I think we've got to go for the recency bias. I mean,
I tend to agree with you there. I struggle to see him be leader. Something's got to change. Something's got to happen.
Yeah, I mean, so last night on Newsnight, they had a chat between 3 Tory journalists, advisor types, right? Which was Tim Montgomery, who, you know, is a Victor Orban fan, for one, but he is a big player in this game. He's been a big player in Conservative politics for 30 years, right? He doesn't speak for anyone, speaks for himself, and he's, you know, interested in them and the Conservatives winning the elections. You had Christopher Hope from the Telegraph, who is just a completely on-message Boris Johnson supporter, Brexiteer, and Emily Sheffield at Standard, who put somewhere between the two. Tim Montgomery was calling it as it is and saying, just understand, the Conservative Party will not tolerate a person who is a drag on their vote. They want to win the next election, and if they think Boris Johnson is a liability, they will get rid and they will find someone, right? And he clearly is a liability. I mean, even despite all the very impressive spin and the diversion of going to Ukraine situation, 57% of people immediately wanted him to resign yesterday, right? He is an absolute, him and Sunak, I think now, are a drag on the Conservative Party, and they're going to get
just quickly on that though, Paul. I mean, like, obviously the person, we have a first past the post system, as you well know, and whoever wins this election is always going to, any general election is always going to have a minority of the population. If you just looked at Tory voters, 64% said he should stay in his job. You know, that it's Tory voters that matter here. It's not.
Right. So they might keep him in his job. I'm not saying. I mean, I can see in the short term there is that complacency, but they're going to get beaten up in real elections. they're going to get beaten up in the local elections, I think, and they're going to get. I mean, Wakefield, bring on Wakefield.
But if you look at the resignation of oh God, that's bad. I forgot her name last week as well. The spokeswoman who giggled about the parties. Tell me her name. Yes, exactly. Allegra Stratton. So the resignation of Allegra Stratton happened in January, and I think the Tories were about level in the polls prior to that, and they fell to 7 points behind immediately after that. They got it back to level again by March, when the details of the suitcases of wine came out, and then as soon as that came out, they fell back to 8 points behind again.
Well, hang on.
They were 2 weeks ago. There were 3 polls where they were 2 points behind, 3 points behind, and level. The people that are responding to these polls seem to be able to forget stuff quite quickly. There's a lot of recency bias in the polling. I can easily see a situation where, yeah, he's going to go 10, 11 points behind in the next week or so, but in 3 weeks' time, this can all be forgotten about quite easily.
I don't think it will. I think that what we're dealing with here is, again, it's the first past the post system. It's the binary narrative, which always kicks in first past the post at some point. If we went back to the last parliament, polls were all over the place midterm because you had new parties. But what you did see was very predictably in the running, people start to make the obvious tactical choice. People who were saying, even Labour, as disaster, did go up in the polls during the campaign, because that was people who were saying, oh, I'm not convinced by Labour, so I'll say Lib Dem, or I'll say Green, or Change even, right? But then come the actual reality of an election, they come over to the party they need to do to stop the one they don't like, right? And likewise, Boris, of course, flew at the expense of the Brexit party, right? Now, the electorate right now, for months prior to Partygate definitely made it worse. There's been a clear majority of people who are supporting Labour, the Lib Dems, the Greens, and the SNP. And I'm saying, at a general election, however effective tactical voting is or not, there's enough common sense that people will migrate to those parties. And Labour, everything in the poll says people aren't convinced about Labour. That's what you get from focus groups. And yet they're solidly over 40% now.
Yeah.
Right? With the Greens liable to move in their direction as well. And that just tells me that's we're going to change the government.
Yeah.
I don't see. My issue with that is that, we did have that very geeky podcast that we did not that very long ago, where we talked about, I'm trying to remember which firm it was, possibly Survation, having a change in their methodology on the polling. And the other polling companies are not really fallen in line with that. And if we remember post 2015, the polling companies messed up because they assumed too great a turnout for Labour. So they adjusted the other way a little bit. And then in 2017, they weren't able to react enough to what was a huge turnout amongst young people for Labour, because which could have been predicted because of the huge voter registration that happened early in the campaign. So then they switched back the other way, and then in 2000, so the polling companies keep getting that wrong in terms of how much of the Labour vote will turn out and how much of the Tory vote will turn out. And I think they've still got that badly wrong at the moment. What you read a lot at the moment with all of this Partygate stuff is they're all the same. I saw somebody that I would consider to be quite clever, but doesn't really follow politics day in, day out, tweet just immediately just before we started doing the podcast today. This guy was saying, well, that's it. People will just be done with politics now. And I actually think, if that is the conclusion that people are coming to, the man in the street, well, that's a great result for the Tories.
No, yeah. I don't agree, because I think the people who are doing that are people who are not particularly right-wing, not particularly political, but they vote Tory, because they're the people who are disappointed. The people who didn't vote Tory knew what Boris Johnson was. None of us are surprised at all. I mean, nothing about this is surprising.
No, but in fairness, William, by the next election, he's surely too tainted to lead the Conservatives at that stage. I mean, there's so much mud you can throw at him.
Yeah, and I think we have gotten past the point where he's sort of done the Trump thing of so many things are thrown at him that none of them stick. I think what we're getting is sort of a slow tainting or a fast tainting, at least it feels like.
Well, is he effective? Is he effective as a party leader? Is he effective as a prime minister? I guess just basically.
No, no on both counts really. When it comes to that, I don't think he's particularly effective as a party leader. I think it's more been sort of brute strength and force, him getting into the position. I don't think he's had testy relationships with his backbenchers for quite a while anyway. This is not the first thing that's caused discord behind them, and I do agree with the sort of general vibe that they're more motivated by self-interest and self-preservation than anything. And as for being an effective prime minister, I can't believe I'm playing devil's advocate here. His defenders point to Ukraine a lot, and they do, but that is focusing, I think, just on the military response and the speed of that. And even then, I wouldn't want to say that he's responsible for all of that anyway. And people were saying, it's the line going out that he's made all the right calls on the pandemic, which is just plainly not true. And that for that he should stay. I don't believe that's the case. I'm not sure about what the latest polls said are really his job performance, but it's not a pluralistic view. It's not a majority view that I made the right calls or has been this great leader who's committed a minor indiscretion here or there.
With your crystal ball, what are the top 3 political priorities for the people in the next election?
Last time looking forward. Oh, okay.
Well, we've 3 years to stop irreversible climate possible extinction, which I presume will be some part. And I don't know where do voters go in that? If we've a cost of living crisis at the moment, but for 2024, what will people actually care about at that stage?
Cost of living crisis. We're still going to have a cost. We've had a cost of, for very large parts of the country, we've had a cost of living crisis for 20 years, right? And it's now reaching emergency. The difference is now it's hitting their voters, right? It's hitting pensioners. It's hitting people who have on fixed incomes. So that is going to last. It's going to do damage. I think that the fallout from Brexit, although we have a kind of omerta about Brexit going on in Britain where we just find any other reason to talk about the things going wrong. I mean, the reason why there's total traffic chaos in Kent is just the holiday weekend. It's just the behaviour of drivers. Nothing to do with Dover. But people are noticing this. It's hitting them. It's affecting their lives. You look at things like the sewage spills as well, right? It's not a big issue in the country because people sadly don't see the importance of such a thing. But when you look at the map of where the sewage spills have been, there's a lot of constituencies, coastal constituencies, most of which are Tory, that have been hit by this, right? And I'm quite sure that locally it would be possible that Brexit cuts through on that. And then critically, as always, the leader. And that's the point. The Boris has become a toxic leader and all Keir Starmer has to do is be vanilla.
Yeah.
He will be the beneficiary of a referendum on Boris.
Neil?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Either you believe in polling or you don't believe in polling. I mean, Keir Starmer's personal approval rating just goes down and down. Who looks the most prime ministerial, or can you see him as a prime minister? It's just not happening for him. So I don't really buy that in a popularity contest, which it often is in politics in the UK between the leaders of the parties, that Keir Starmer can just be vanilla and he'll get it, because most people, they had a bit of a line, the leader of the opposition office for a long time, of saying, well, once people start to see Keir Starmer, they'll start to like what they see, the son of a tool maker and all this kind of nonsense. And they made an excuse that people weren't able to see him because he couldn't get out and get around the country because of Brexit, because of COVID. He's had his chance to get out and go around the country now, and people don't really like it. He has very low approval. His approval rating right now is lower than Corbyn's at this time.
But hang on, just on that approval rating thing, we can both quote polls here. I think it was Ben Page, one of those firms anyway, measured not the approval rating, but the net approval rating over the main rival, going back with all the opposition leaders this century. And Starmer's in the same position Cameron was in, if not a better one. at this stage, right? And that's not, obviously, I agree, it's not down to Starmer. It's not down to Starmer cutting through. But it's the simple fact that Boris has now got a negativity around him, an entrenched opposition that puts him in that place that his predecessor didn't have. So David Cameron didn't have that. You know, even when Labour was ahead of David Cameron, he didn't have horrific approval rates, nor did Osborne in the same way. Miliband never won that, was never winning that battle. And by being vanilla, by just literally standing up and saying, you're a bad man, you're wrong, you should resign, he's doing okay.
I don't get this idea that we can just base it all on vibes. I mean, at the end of the day, this guy has been presented to the electorate several times so far. I appreciate it's just in by-elections, but it's just they scrambled. They got a very low turnout in the last one. They increased their vote proportion, but of a hugely low vote in a very safe seat. In the, I can't remember, Birmingham Edrington. Obviously the Lib Dems had their couple of surges in Cheshire and Amersham and up in North Shropshire, but Labour were really squeezed out. The turnouts have been horrendously low in those. People talking about the local elections like they're going to make a really big difference. Personally, I don't think in terms of Boris Johnson resigning, I don't think the local elections make any difference whatsoever. There's absolutely zero chance that if the Tories have a bad night in the local elections, he turns around and says, well, I've got to go, I'll fall on my sword. Zero chance.
Well, again, I quote Tim Montgomery last night, what he was saying, just this point. He said, the thing that will spook Tory MPs is if the Lib Dems start winning those council seats. If the Lib Dems have a good night of their
I don't necessarily agree with that.
But most Tory MPs are not fighting Labour.
But if you look, I understand that. But if you listen, yeah, sure. I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I'm saying is that most Tory MPs, they just don't care about councils. They're not interested in that. Like, councils have been brilliant, actually. Labour doing quite well in councils has actually been quite good for the Tories over the last 20 years because they've been able to pass on austerity by cutting council budgets and then blaming the Labour Party. You know, a lot of why the Red Wall fell is 20 years of people saying, well, we've had Labour in charge around here and they've never done us any good. That was a thing that you heard all the time in the last election. And that was in places where, you know, they had a Labour MP, they had a Labour council, but obviously the Labour MP wasn't from the party of government, and the council were facing 66% cuts to their budget. So, you know, to the money given to them by government. So obviously they were going to be in a tough spot. And that was where the breeding ground for the kind of Red Wall collapse has been building for a very long time. I think the Tories, you know, they're not really that bothered about running councils. They might pretend they are.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about they know what it signals. That's what Montgomery was saying. They will know what it signals.
Yeah, but we can't keep ignoring what's actually being said, Paul. Like, only 3 weeks ago, people were being asked, who would you vote for if there was a general election tomorrow? And it was a tie between the Tories and Labour. It's not like the party, you know,
1/3 the electorate voted for other parties.
Yeah, so I understand that, but we live in a first past the post system.
Which will be binary. Come an election, all of this becomes more binary, right? That is my point. You know, you go back to the equivalent time under Corbyn or Miliband or Brown, right? You have a vast range of opposition forces against Labour. Yeah. Labour is the negative. We must stop them getting in. We've got to get rid of them, or we've got to stop Corbyn, or we've got to stop like the coalition of chaos or whatever. And you see that vast sway of like non-two-party vote, mostly going to UKIP or the Brexit Party, or at the last election, local elections before the general election, it was like hundreds of Brexiteer count independents all over the country, right? That was the narrative going on, and the point was, how was all that going to play out at a general election? Well, if it comes to the binary race, the Brexiteers get their 43% solid, right? I'm saying they've lost that. The Tories have lost that. They are losing people all over the country. And the Lib Dem performance is absolutely critical to them. That is why they have a majority, because that was the real change after 2010. Wiping those out doesn't just give you like 50 extra seats. It gives you the freedom to send your limited number of campaigners elsewhere.
I do agree with that. But having said that, if you look back at the 2010 general election where the Lib Dems did particularly well, you'll see that their victories were in the southwest of England, and those constituencies are just not coming back. You know, places like North Cornwall, Torbay, Penzance, which were always considered to be two-way marginals between the Lib Dems and the Tories. Brexit has broken that. The people down there voted Brexit and they like Boris Johnson. Now, you might say, well, Boris Johnson's unpopular now, they're going to go back to the Lib Dems. They're still thinking in a Brexit binary way, in my opinion. I don't think those southwestern constituencies are in play for the Lib Dems. Now, you're going to turn around and tell me, oh, yeah, but they've got the yellow wall now. They're going to win Guildford and they're going to win Surrey, whatever it is. But there just aren't enough of those constituencies. There are a few and they're going to win a few. But what have they got at the moment, the Lib Dems? I can't even remember. 7 MPs?
Right. Yeah, okay.
If they get to 15, that's not going to be enough to topple Boris Johnson. And they're not going to get to 25.
Well, firstly, I'll give you one seat. Like there might be a by-election in Somerton and Frome, right, with Warburton, right? I think the Lib Dems will take Somerton and Frome, right?
Well, it's possible, but it's a 19,000 majority.
But if they get, the point is, if the Lib Dems, if we are in a national situation where the Lib Dems take 20 seats off or 15 seats off the Conservative Party, that brings the Tory Party down to about 348, 350. And Labour only needs to take 25 seats.
I understand.
And if you get them below 350...
Paul, I understand. Let me quickly say, I do understand that, but you're talking about tripling the number of Lib Dem seats. I agree with you. In a by-election, standing against a guy that's been done for, I can't remember what David Warburton's done. He done cocaine was what he done mostly, but yeah, all kinds of things. You can definitely win a by-election in that situation, and you can beat a 19,000 majority. But you'll probably lose it back in the general election. That happens quite a lot. Lib Dems do well in by-elections because they can mobilise their forces, they can bring all their people to one place. But when it comes to a general election where they're trying to fight 20 battles, it's much harder, and they don't have the money. I totally take your point. I think the Lib Dems will have a good general election. If there was a general election next year, I think they might get to 15 seats or 16 seats, which would be a really good result for them. I don't think they'll get to 25 though. And if they're going to overcome an 80-seat majority of the Tories, that's what they're going to have to do.
Right, an 80-seat majority only needs 40 gains.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right, and it is, and the point. I mean, you say about Lib Dems and by-elections. You're right. Historically, yes. But note the difference here. Again, it's another sort of straw in the wind. The by-elections we've had from 2010 to 2020 that didn't happen. They looked a totally busted flush to Lib Dems. They no longer had that. We're not the Tories. We're not Labour. They were just your Tory little helpers, right? Yeah. And then look what's happened this time. It's changed. Something has changed. Cheshire and Amersham to me was an absolutely...
It was an incredible result. It was one of the most incredible by-election results in 50 years.
Because you didn't even have a scandal over it, right? There wasn't like an heritage shit. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that.
But we see, we still have like 8 polling companies churning out 1 poll a week. The Lib Dems still don't break 10% very often.
But that's not what matters. We just discussed. That's not what matters in the seat. It's about.
I agree with you that if we have a whole bunch of by-elections in the next 2 years, the Lib Dems will do very well in them. I just don't think that they'll replicate that in a general election. I'm not saying they won't replicate it at all. I think they'll easily double the number of their MPs. I just don't think they'll triple them.
It'd be definitely interesting to see in that election how many people don't vote Labour, don't vote Conservatives. I think there'll be a lot of issues, maybe particularly in relation to the climate, that might come to the fore. William, we'll have to talk France. It's a 2-horse race now. 1 to 9 Macron, 5 to 1 Le Pen, and the betting and the polling was Macron basically 27.6, Le Pen 23.41, and Mélenchon was like 22%. But it's going to be closer, obviously, in the runoff.
Yep. So just to run off, actually, because you did a good job there mentioning that Jean-Luc Mélenchon outperformed polling expectations and really gave quite a few people either hairy or sort of potentially life-affirming moments before Le Pen made it through to the second round. He was third in. Macron won the first round. Le Pen finished second. That was expected. I think what was not really expected was just over a month ago that this was an election I think people could be seeing as a contest. Now, there can be a difference between the markets and the narrative and the polling, what they say. And I think the markets have gone back to thinking that Macron has this to lose, which I have to say is not necessarily an assessment I'd agree with just yet. I think this is an election that he will very much have to fight for. He's out on the campaign trail more, but those visits are not going particularly well. He's receiving a lot of heat for the cost of living crisis, no pun intended. And he's facing a large amount of voters who believe that he is out of touch and aloof, and that you know, Le Pen would give them sort of a real representation, be a real sort of changed candidate. And it's amazing sort of think of how far framing's moved since 2017. And again, I think one of the really important parts of this election, when people look back, will be the presence of Eric Zemmour. But nevertheless, we have one poll, one runoff poll, which puts Macron about 53.5 and Le Pen at 47.5%. That's obviously a chunky enough gap to win. That's just about outside the margin of error with a bit to spare. But there are still about 2 weeks campaigning until that final vote, and every vote is going to count. And I think, you know, this is it. You know, it's there to be won. I still think for either candidate, Macron would be the favourite for me, but I have to say I wouldn't be going anywhere near
the 1 to 9.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at the moment. I think we got to see how he campaigns, how people respond to sort of the raised stakes, and what subsequent polling tells us about where other candidates, the vast majority of whom have given Macron their backing to their voters, go.
Neil, you got to be encouraged by 22% of voters voting pretty much, voting left in this election.
Well, more than 22% voted left, but 22% voted for the left candidate that had a chance of winning. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the two Trotskyite candidates took about 2.5% between them, and the sort of effectively inverted commas Labour Party took 2%. So if more people that voted for those had voted for Mélenchon, he might have got there. You could obviously, on the right, you could say that if I think it was 7% didn't vote for Zemmour, then Le Pen could have won the first round. I guess that's what the corollary of that argument is. And of course, people vote for their kind of top preference in the first round. But I don't know, the left are often asked to make pragmatic sacrifices in order to help the centre. I sort of felt like there was an obvious pragmatic sacrifice to make if you were on the morning waking up and thinking, who should I vote for? I'm slightly on the left. There was basically only one person at all on the left who had any chance of toppling, the top two. I get it, or stopping the fascist candidate from being in the last two. Mélenchon conceded quite early on when the first poll came out, the exit poll. And then when they started doing the counting at one stage, he was only 0.8% behind, which was just a few 100,000 people. I wonder whether there was a slight sort of beating heart of people thinking, oh my God, we've conceded a bit too early here. I think he ended up losing by 1.2%. And then he came out and said to his supporters, I think he stressed it around about 5 times in his thank you speech, that they should not give one vote to Le Pen. Now, some people in the Macron camp said that he should have explicitly said that, you know, I'm appealing to my supporters to go and vote for Macron now in order to stop Le Pen. I think he's done about as much as he can. He probably feels like no concessions were really made to him. Macron's generally kind of tried to appeal with you know, his foreign minister has made a few kind of racist comments. I don't think it's even arguably racist. I think it just is racist to try and sort of bend towards the Le Pen side of the argument. I guess a lot of Mélenchon supporters would feel that over the past few years, Macron's made no real concessions or appeal to them. So why should they be doing him a favour? I still think there's going to be quite a lot of abstentions from Mélenchon supporters, and that's got to worry the Macron camp.
Yeah, last word to you, Paul. Like, does this suggest a kind of I don't know, what does this suggest? Is Macron is 1-9 here, but this does look like it might be a little bit closer than he's been 1-20 at one stage.
I think it's got really strong shades of Trump v Clinton and of Brexit. And I sort of form the same kind of conclusion. I agree with Will, really, what Will said. I mean, I think Macron will win, but like by 51-49 or 52-48. I do think she will overperform the polls, because I think there will be a mass abstention from not just Mélenchon voters, but left voters generally. I mean, the numbers in that election show everything. The centre right and the centre left, the two mainstream parties, the two biggest parties in France, got 6.4% between them. So we're now basically in a situation where it's establishment versus revolution, populism versus status quo. Very much like Trump v Clinton, very much like Brexit. And I'm very, very worried, because not only may she win, but you have to think 5 years on, he can't run a third time. There's no other mainstream political party other than populists now. And France, the French far right is massive. And, a lot of Macron voters are centre-right people. They're former Republicans. So if it boils down to that binary choice, they'll go with the fascists next time. And it's just another very, very worrying situation in the Western democracy, in my book.
I did notice, by the way, just quickly on what's she called, Le Crest, a third of her voters are going to vote for Le Pen, by the looks of it, which, I mean, they're supposed to be a sort of mainstream, effectively Tory party kind of thing. Yet they're quite happy to vote for the far right candidate. The other thing is that the two mainstream parties, effectively the Labour Party and Conservative Party, who got sort of roughly 2% and just under 5% for the Republican Party, or what you might think of as the Conservative Party in France. If you get less than 5%, you have to pay for your own campaign, which basically means they got no money now, either party. So what Paul said is absolutely right. They're not going to be able to sort of regroup and get themselves strong again for the next election. They got no chance. They virtually don't exist now as political parties.
Fascinating stuff. William, what have we got looking forward to the next few weeks?
Lots and lots. Northern Ireland, Australia, France again.
BBC political editor?
Yes, well, actually, I was going to say this earlier during the show, but this is the last time I can berate you or bore you or suffocate you all with BBC political editor chat, because they've named one. Chris Mason took it. Chris Mason.
Who would have known it?
First leg of your treble, right?
Oh my gosh, it didn't do too badly, although unfortunately I didn't get a place in the Masters. But anyhow, yes, lots of that to come. Local elections, we'll be looking at some of the London stuff. We'll be looking at what we can do all around the country. All suggestions, by the way, gratefully received. If you want to look at the market, Australia, of course, Northern Ireland, possibly a couple, maybe even more than a couple on Northern Ireland, depending at which angle we hit it from. And there's lots of angles to hit it from. And possibly some specials down the line. So do keep it tuned to the polling station. Also, a big thanks to everybody who's gotten in touch. We're getting lots of good feedback these days, and people who are sticking around on the watch times. And we're very grateful for your time, because it's not as if political podcasting is a niche genre anymore. So thank you very much to everybody who's listened and watched.
Yeah, Northern Ireland's going to be fascinating. We had Michelle O'Neill cooling on the whole unity thing, which is very, very unusual for Sinn Féin. Doug Beattie gave an unbelievable interview in a Southern newspaper on Sunday. And we have the basket case that is the DUP and unionism in general, and Northern Ireland in general. That's all ahead of us. Thanks to the lads. We shall be back next week.